The galaxy was on fire. Streaks of energy cut across the black void, illuminating the battlefield where warships clashed in a desperate struggle for dominance. The United Earth Federation's fleet fought valiantly against the formidable armada of Eldoria, a race of beings whose mastery of energy-based technology had made them nearly unstoppable. Explosions bloomed like dying stars, leaving behind shattered hulls and fading echoes of the fallen. Among the chaos, Commander Ethan Carter stood on the bridge of the UEF flagship, his face a mask of grim determination. He had spent years fighting in this war, witnessing the cost of every battle etched into the eyes of his soldiers. And now, after countless sacrifices, the unthinkable had happened. Earth's leaders had decided to negotiate peace. But the price of that peace was something Ethan could hardly comprehend. A marriage. Not just any marriage, but his own. To Lyra Vex, the Princess of Eldoria. Ethan clenched his fists, barely suppressing his anger. He was a soldier, not a pawn in some political game. Yet, here he was, being forced into a union with someone he had never met, someone who represented everything he had been fighting against. His mind raced with questions. Did she hate this as much as he did? Was she being forced into this too? Or was she just another cold-hearted aristocrat, willing to trade her future for the sake of diplomacy? When he arrived on Eldoria, he found his answer in her eyes. Lyra Vex was every bit as furious as he was. The moment they stood face to face, in the grand ceremonial hall of the Eldorian Palace, her violet gaze burned with defiance. She wore the traditional golden robes of her people, the intricate patterns glowing faintly under the ethereal lights. Yet, despite her regal appearance, there was nothing delicate about her stance. She held herself like a warrior, proud, unyielding. So, she said, her voice carrying a sharp edge. "This is the man I am to marry." Ethan met her glare with equal intensity. "And you must be the princess who had no choice." Her lips curled into a mirthless smile. "Make no mistake, human. If I had a choice, I would never allow this farce to happen." "Then we agree on something." Tension crackled between them, heavier than the weight of their people's expectations. The gathered officials watched in silence, waiting for them to perform the diplomatic theater required of them. But Ethan couldn't bring himself to play along. He had imagined many ways this encounter would go, but none of them had prepared him for the sheer force of will emanating from Lyra. This was not a woman who would bow to fate easily. And neither would he. The ceremony proceeded despite their resistance. Vows were exchanged, not out of love, but obligation. As Ethan placed a ceremonial band around Lyra's wrist, a symbol of unity between their species, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was sealing his own fate. Later that night, as they sat across from each other in their private quarters, silence stretched between them like a chasm. Neither of them touched the feast laid out before them. Neither wanted to be here. Finally, Lyra spoke, her voice softer this time. "Do you believe in fate, Commander?" Ethan exhaled sharply. "No, I believe in choices. And right now, neither of us have one." She studied him for a moment before looking away. "There is an ancient prophecy among my people," she admitted. "A child born of Eldorian and human blood will change the course of the galaxy?" Ethan scoffed. "So that's why they are forcing this union? Because of some legend?" Lyra's fingers tightened around the stem of her untouched goblet. "I don't know if it's just a legend. But the High Council believes it. They think our union is destiny." Destiny. The word left a bitter taste in his mouth. He had spent his whole life fighting for control over his own path, only to have it ripped away by forces beyond his understanding. And yet, as he looked at Lyra, he realized she was just as trapped as he was. For the first time since he arrived on Eldoria, Ethan felt a flicker of something unexpected. Not love, not yet. But understanding. Perhaps that was the first step. The grand hall of Eldoria shimmered with ethereal light, casting an otherworldly glow upon the intricate crystal architecture. The atmosphere was thick with expectation, yet beneath the opulent decorations and the presence of dignitaries from both worlds, tension crackled like an approaching storm. Ethan Carter stood at the altar, his jaw set in grim determination. He had faced death on countless battlefields, yet nothing had prepared him for this moment. His dark ceremonial uniform felt stifling, every embroidered insignia a reminder of the duty that had brought him here. Across from him, Princess Lyra Vex stood clad in a flowing gown woven with strands of light itself, her expression one of barely restrained fury. The officiant, an Eldorian elder, began the ceremonial rites in a melodic, ancient tongue. Though the words were foreign to him, Ethan understood their meaning well enough. This was a pact, a treaty bound in marriage, a union meant to symbolize the fragile peace between their two warring species. But to him and Lyra, it was little more than a prison sentence. He stole a glance at her. Her violet eyes, cold as the void of space, refused to meet his. It was clear that, like him, she detested this arrangement. And yet, here they were, two unwilling participants in a cosmic game of power. When the moment came, they extended their hands, and a ceremonial binding clasp was placed upon their wrists. The device hummed as it activated, emitting a soft glow, a symbol of their enforced unity. Ethan resisted the urge to recoil at the sensation of energy pulsing against his skin. He wondered if she felt it too, or if she was better at hiding her discomfort. As the final words of the ritual were spoken, the gathered crowd erupted in formal applause, a hollow sound that did little to ease the weight pressing down on his chest. This wasn't a celebration, it was a transaction completed. The reception that followed was no less suffocating. The grand banquet hall was filled with nobles and officials from both factions, all eager to witness the spectacle of this unprecedented union. Ethan found himself trapped in tedious conversations, exchanging pleasantries with individuals who cared little for him beyond his symbolic role. Lyra, for her part, was no better off. Every interaction she had was met with thinly veiled curiosity, her people scrutinizing her every move. She handled it with grace, but Ethan could see the irritation simmering beneath her composed exterior. At one point, a particularly insistent human diplomat approached them. "Commander Carter, Princess Lyra, tell me, what are your thoughts on this new chapter for our people?" His tone was laced with artificial enthusiasm, as if willing them to play along with the farce. Lyra's smile was razor sharp. "I think," she said smoothly, "that history will judge this moment in ways neither of us can predict." Ethan smirked at her answer but kept his own response brief. "We can only hope it was the right decision." As the night dragged on, the formalities became unbearable. When they were finally allowed to retreat to their private quarters, neither spoke a word. The silence between them was heavy, thick with unspoken resentment. Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Well, that was about as enjoyable as I expected." Lyra scoffed, finally allowing her poised mask to slip. "I imagine you were quite the charmer back on Earth." He turned to her, arms crossed. "Look, I know this isn't what either of us wanted. But we're stuck with it. So, what now? We spend the rest of our lives pretending." She regarded him carefully, her expression unreadable. "We do what is necessary. Nothing more. Nothing less." Ethan nodded. That was as much of a truce as he was going to get for now. Despite the bitterness, there was an undeniable tension between them. An awareness. He didn't want to admit it, But Lyra was striking in a way he hadn't anticipated. There was fire in her, a sharp intelligence behind her defiance that intrigued him more than he cared to acknowledge. And in the flickering light of their shared chamber, as their gazes locked for a fleeting second, he wondered if she felt the same. Ethan Carter stepped onto Eldorian soil for the first time, his boots pressing into the soft, iridescent ground. The air was thick with an unfamiliar but strangely intoxicating scent, a mixture of metallic tang and floral sweetness. Towering structures of shimmering crystal reached skyward, pulsating with energy, reflecting the planet's twin suns in dazzling patterns. The beauty of Eldoria was undeniable, but beneath its enchanting surface, Ethan could sense the undercurrents of tension and hostility. Surrounded by an entourage of Eldorian guards and UEF officials, Ethan was escorted from the landing platform towards the royal palace, a massive construct of translucent stone that seemed to shift in color depending on the angle of the light. Every step he took was watched. Every breath measured. His presence here was not one of welcome, but of necessity. Lyra Vex walked a few paces ahead, her golden ceremonial robes flowing behind her. Unlike at the wedding, she was silent, her face an unreadable mask. But Ethan wasn't fooled. He had seen the fire in her eyes, the resentment simmering just beneath the surface. She did not want him here any more than he wanted to be. As they entered the palace's main hall, an assembly of Eldorian nobles and military officials awaited them. The tension in the room was palpable. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, their luminous eyes studying Ethan with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. He was an outsider, an enemy who had suddenly been thrust into their world. And they did not trust him. Ethan was taken to a chamber deeper in the palace, a place meant to serve as his quarters. The walls shimmered faintly, displaying moving constellations that mimicked the Eldorian night sky. Despite its grandeur, it felt more like a gilded cage than a home. He knew that every movement he made would be monitored, every interaction scrutinized. As the doors sealed behind him, he exhaled, allowing himself a rare moment of vulnerability. This world was alien to him in every way, its people, its customs, its very essence. And yet, for all his reluctance, he knew he had no choice but to adapt. Meanwhile, Lyra stood on one of the palace balconies, staring out at her city. The spires of Eldoria glittered like a sea of stars, but tonight, they felt cold, distant. She had spent her entire life fighting for her people, resisting the control of the High Council, determined to forge her own destiny. And yet, here she was, bound by tradition, forced into an alliance with a man she barely knew. She had expected Ethan to be arrogant, brutish, a war-hardened soldier with no understanding of her world. And yet, he had surprised her. There was a quiet strength in him, a presence that unsettled her more than she cared to admit. He was not what she had imagined, and that made him dangerous. A soft chime echoed through the air, breaking her reverie. She turned to see an elder standing behind her, his robes shimmering like liquid silver. His expression was solemn. "There is something you must know, Princess," he said, his voice tinged with urgency. "A prophecy, long hidden from you?" Lyra frowned. "A prophecy? What are you talking about?" The elder hesitated, then gestured toward a holographic scroll that appeared before her. Ancient symbols danced across its surface, forming words that sent a chill down her spine. "The child of two worlds shall rise," the prophecy read. "Born of fire and light, they will shatter the chains of fate and rewrite the stars." Her breath caught in her throat. She had heard whispers of a prophecy before, but never had she seen it in full. The implications were staggering. The High Council had not arranged this marriage solely for peace. They believed in this prophecy. They believed that she and Ethan were destined to create something or someone who would alter the course of history. Her hands clenched into fists. She despised the thought of being a pawn in their grand design. But as she stared at the glowing script, a darker thought crept into her mind. What if the prophecy was true? That night, Ethan found himself summoned to a private chamber deep within the palace. The walls pulsed with an eerie blue light, casting long shadows across the ornate room. Lyra was already there, standing rigidly beside the elder who had spoken to her earlier. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something different in her eyes. Something resembling concern. "We need to talk," she said. Ethan folded his arms. "About what?" She hesitated for only a moment before stepping closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "There is a prophecy. One that speaks of a child born of both our worlds. A child who will change the fate of the galaxy." Ethan's breath hitched. "So that's what this is about. That's why they forced this marriage. They think we are some kind of cosmic key." Lyra nodded. "The Council believes it. And if they believe it, others will too." A heavy silence settled between them. Ethan had spent his entire life fighting wars dictated by politics and power, but this was something else entirely. Destiny, prophecy. He had never given much thought to such things. But now, standing in this alien palace, with Lyra watching him intently, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had just stepped onto a path from which there was no return. "So what do we do?" he finally asked. Lyra exhaled slowly. "For now, we survive. And we uncover the truth before it's too late." Ethan met her gaze and, for the first time since arriving on Eldoria, felt something shift between them. They were still strangers. Still enemies forced into an uneasy alliance. But perhaps, just perhaps, they were something more. Something inevitable. The sky above Eldoria shimmered with its twin moons, casting a soft, silver glow over the crystalline cityscape. Ethan Carter had seen many alien worlds, but none as breathtaking and as perilous as this one. Yet tonight, beauty was the last thing on his mind. He stood outside Lyra's chamber, his fists clenched. The urgent summons had been unexpected, and the dread pooling in his stomach only deepened as he stepped inside. Lyra lay motionless on a hovering bed of translucent energy, her normally vibrant violet skin now pallid. Her breaths came shallow and uneven, a stark contrast to the proud and untouchable warrior princess he had come to know. The room buzzed with Eldorian healers, their robes flowing as they chanted in hushed, melodic tones. Despite their efforts, an undeniable tension filled the space. This was beyond their control. "What's happening to her?" Ethan demanded, his voice sharp with concern. One of the healers, an elder with deep-set eyes that gleamed with centuries of wisdom, turned to him. "Her life force is destabilizing. The sacred energy within her is unraveling." Ethan frowned. "Then fix it." The elder's gaze was unreadable. "We cannot. Her essence has become entangled with something beyond our reach. There is only one way to restore her." A sinking feeling coiled in Ethan's chest. "And what would that be?" The healer hesitated before answering. "You." A stunned silence filled the room. Ethan blinked. "Me." Another healer stepped forward, his expression grave. "The bond between you and Princess Lyra is not mere symbolism. The ancient rites that joined you are far more profound than a political alliance. Your energies have intertwined. If she is to live, you must enter the soul convergence ritual." Ethan swallowed hard. He had spent his life as a soldier, trained to fight, to survive. But this was something else entirely. Still, he looked at Lyra, at the way her body trembled with every faint breath, the way her lips, once sharp with biting remarks, were now still and pale. He had never asked for this union, but the thought of losing her sent a surge of defiance through his veins. What do I need to do? The ritual chamber was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. The walls pulsed with living light, intricate symbols shifting as if whispering secrets of a time long past. At the center lay a circular platform of pure luminescent stone, where Lyra's fragile form had been placed. The elder healer stood before him, holding a crystalline dagger infused with golden energy. The soul convergence ritual is not without risks, he warned. You must open yourself completely. If you resist, if your spirit wavers, both of you may be lost. Ethan exhaled sharply. Let's get on with it. The elder nodded and began to chant. The air thickened with power, and the dagger's glow intensified. Ethan felt a strange pull deep within his chest, as if something inside him was awakening. The healer stepped forward and pressed the blade lightly against Ethan's palm, just enough to draw a single drop of blood. The moment it touched the platform, the entire room ignited with energy. A force slammed into him, not physical, but something deeper, something that reached into the very core of his being. His vision blurred as he was pulled into a realm beyond reality. He found himself standing in a vast expanse of swirling light. Before him, Lyra hovered, her form flickering between solid and ethereal. Her eyes snapped open, glowing with an intensity that made his breath catch. Ethan, her voice was a whisper, laced with confusion and pain. He stepped closer, instinct driving him forward. I'm here. A surge of warmth enveloped them as tendrils of energy wove between them. Ethan could feel her presence, her emotions, her anger, her pride, her fear. But beneath it all, there was something else. Loneliness. Without thinking, he reached out and grasped her hand. The moment their skin met, a shockwave rippled through the space. A brilliant light exploded around them, and suddenly, he understood. Their bond wasn't just a consequence of their forced union, it had always been there, waiting to be awakened. As the light receded, Ethan found himself back in the ritual chamber, gasping for breath. The healers murmured in awe as Lyra stirred, color returning to her face. Slowly, her eyes fluttered open, and when they locked onto his, something unspoken passed between them. Neither of them had chosen this path. But now, there was no denying it, they were connected in ways neither could escape. And perhaps, neither wanted to. Late one evening, while reviewing security protocols in his chambers, he received an urgent summons from Lyra. Something in her voice unsettled him. It wasn't anger or disdain, those were emotions he had grown accustomed to, but rather something far more dangerous, fear. When he arrived at Lyra's private chamber, she was pacing restlessly, her emerald robes swaying with each frantic step. She turned to face him, her expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. They are planning something, Ethan, she whispered. A faction known as the Shadowborn. They believe our union is a disgrace and will stop at nothing to see it undone. Ethan crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. How do you know this? Lyra hesitated before gesturing toward an intricate, floating orb in the center of the room. It pulsed with an eerie blue glow. This contains intercepted transmissions from the underground network. They intend to assassinate you before the next summit. Ethan stepped closer, the implications sinking in. He had suspected resistance, but an outright assassination attempt meant this was bigger than political opposition, it was war in the making. They think killing me will dissolve the alliance. Ethan scoffed. That's a lot of faith in one man's death. Lyra met his gaze, her eyes searching his for understanding. To them, you are the symbol of everything they despise. A human tainting Eldoria's royal bloodline. If they succeed, the fragile trust between our worlds will shatter. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, Ethan took a steadying breath and said, "What do we do?" Lyra's fingers trembled as she clasped them together. "I need to make a choice." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What choice?" She turned away from him, her voice barely audible. "I was raised to put my people first. If I renounce you, if I say this marriage was forced upon me and that I reject the union, they might spare your life. They would see me as a victim, not a traitor." A sharp pain twisted in Ethan's chest, though he refused to acknowledge it. "And that's an option you're considering?" Lyra closed her eyes, her fists clenched. "If it means keeping you alive." Ethan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "No. I'm not running, and I'm sure as hell not hiding behind a false renouncement." He took a step forward, his voice firm. "We fight this together. If we give in now, we prove them right. That we don't belong together." Lyra turned to face him, searching his face for any sign of hesitation. Instead, she found only unwavering resolve. Something in her heart clenched at the sight. "Then we need a plan," she murmured. A knock at the door made them both tense. Lyra moved quickly, her posture straightening, her expression returning to its regal composure. When she opened the door, a royal guard stood there, his face grave. "Your Highness, there has been an attack. One of the human envoys was found dead in the city." Ethan and Lyra exchanged a grim glance. The war in the shadows had begun. Lyra paced the dimly lit archives of the Eldorian palace, her fingers tracing the ancient carvings on the walls. The air smelled of aged parchment and the lingering scent of sacred oils. She had come seeking answers, yet she feared what she might uncover. The texts before her were records of her ancestors, untouched for centuries, hidden away from even the most devoted historians. Her eyes scanned the ancient Eldorian script, and with each word, her heart pounded louder. The story detailed a union much like hers, a princess of Eldoria and a human warrior from an ancient war. Their bond had been formed in secrecy, a desperate attempt to unite their worlds. But the ending of their tale was far from the peace that had been promised. Betrayal, bloodshed, and ruin had followed, painting a grim fate for any such union. The princess had been cast aside, her legacy erased from history. The human, executed as a traitor. Lyra's hands trembled as she closed the tome. Could this be a warning for her own fate? Was Ethan doomed to follow in the footsteps of the fallen warrior? And if so, would she be the one to betray him? Meanwhile, Ethan found himself in a much different battlefield, the Grand Council chambers of Eldoria. The circular hall was filled with robed figures, their expressions a mix of skepticism and disdain. He stood tall, his hands clenched at his sides, unwilling to be dismissed as an outsider any longer. "You expect me to stand aside while my own life is manipulated for your convenience?" Ethan's voice echoed through the chamber, his frustration barely contained. The High Chancellor narrowed his gaze. "You misunderstand, Commander Carter. You are not simply a pawn, you are a catalyst. The peace between our worlds rests on your shoulders." "Then why do I feel like a prisoner rather than an ally?" Ethan countered. "I was promised diplomacy, yet all I've seen are closed doors and hidden agendas." A murmur rippled through the council, but before anyone could respond, the doors swung open with a force that silenced the chamber. Lyra stood in the entrance, her expression unreadable. She strode forward, a heavy tome clutched in her hands. Without a word, she placed it before the council. "This is the truth our people have hidden for generations," Lyra announced, her voice firm. "A truth that has shaped our fear of humans." The council members exchanged wary glances, but the High Chancellor merely raised an eyebrow. And why should we concern ourselves with ancient history? Lyra turned to Ethan, her gaze softer now, conflicted yet resolute. Because history is repeating itself, she said. And we must decide whether to break the cycle or succumb to it. The room fell into a tense silence. Ethan felt the weight of Lyra's words settle over him. He had come here believing he was nothing more than a soldier caught in political maneuvering. But now, he saw something else, a chance to rewrite fate. Lyra took a deep breath, stepping closer to Ethan. I don't know if I can trust you, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But I know one thing: I will not be the princess who lets history decide our future. Ethan reached for her hand, their fingers brushing in a moment of silent understanding. Then let's change it together. The revelation struck like a meteor crashing into the fabric of their fragile alliance. Lyra was pregnant. The news spread through both human and Eldorian worlds with the force of a cosmic storm. To some, the unborn child represented hope, a beacon of unity that could finally bridge the vast chasm between their two civilizations. To others, it was an abomination, a violation of everything they held sacred. Ethan stared at Lyra, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He had never considered fatherhood, much less the father of a child destined to be the first of its kind. Lyra, for her part, was equally shaken. Her entire life had been dictated by duty, by the weight of her bloodline. And now, within her, grew a life that would alter the fate of both their species forever. This can't be happening, she murmured, her fingers instinctively resting on her abdomen. Ethan exhaled sharply. It is. And whatever comes next, we face it together. Lyra looked at him, searching his face for doubt or fear, but all she found was determination. It unsettled her. This human, whom she had once despised, was now the only person she could trust. The Eldorian High Council convened in an emergency session, their expressions carved from stone as they deliberated. There were those who saw the child as a prophecy fulfilled, the bridge between two worlds. But there were others, elders steeped in tradition, who saw it as a curse. To them, the bloodlines must remain pure, untainted by human influence. We must take control of the situation, one elder declared. The child cannot be allowed to disrupt the balance. And what do you suggest? Another challenged. Shall we terminate the pregnancy? Risk a war with the humans? A heavy silence fell over the chamber. None dared voice what many were thinking. Meanwhile, on Earth, human leaders were equally divided. Some welcomed the possibility of true integration, while others feared the implications of an unknown hybrid. Scientists clamored for research, while military strategists whispered of threats. But it was not only the politicians and leaders who watched with wary eyes. In the shadows, enemies lurked. The extremist faction known as the Vezan had long opposed any union between humans and Eldorians. To them, Lyra's pregnancy was a direct insult to their sacred traditions. Their leader, a formidable figure cloaked in darkness, gathered his most loyal followers. The child is a threat, he intoned, his voice devoid of emotion. It must not be born. Ethan and Lyra, unaware of the full scope of danger surrounding them, found solace in one another as they tried to navigate the storm. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of their secluded estate, Ethan reached for her hand. I know this isn't what you wanted, he said. But I need you to know, no matter what happens, I will protect you. And our child. Lyra swallowed hard. She had spent her entire life preparing for war, for diplomacy, for sacrifice. But nothing had prepared her for this, for the quiet strength in Ethan's voice, for the warmth of his touch, for the terrifying realization that she was no longer alone in this fight. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, a distant explosion rocked the night. Alarm klaxons blared across the estate. Guards shouted orders. And then came the unmistakable hum of approaching enemy ships. "They've found us," Ethan muttered, reaching for his weapon. Lyra's hand flew to her stomach, instinctively protective. The battle for their child had begun. The night sky above Eldoria was ablaze with chaos. The once peaceful cityscape now echoed with the blaring alarms of an imminent crisis. Ethan and Lyra had no choice but to run. Their enemies had found them, and now, they were being hunted not just by the extremist faction, but by the very governments that once sought their union. Ethan tightened his grip on Lyra's hand, pulling her behind him as they raced through the labyrinthine corridors of the palace. The guards, once their protectors, were now potential threats. Every shadow concealed an enemy, every turn held the possibility of betrayal. "Where are we going?" Lyra panted, struggling to keep up. Ethan glanced back at her, his expression hard with resolve. "Somewhere safe. We can't trust anyone." Lyra's heart pounded, not just from exertion but from fear. Not for herself but for the life growing inside her. The child was no longer just a symbol of their forced union, it was something more. It was a force neither side could ignore. And now, that made them the most wanted fugitives in the galaxy. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the ground beneath them. The blast sent both of them sprawling across the marble floor. Ethan recovered first, shielding Lyra as debris rained down around them. "They are closing in," he muttered, helping her to her feet. "We need to move now." They navigated through the hidden passages of the palace, a network of tunnels long forgotten by most. Ethan had memorized them from the schematics he studied before coming to Eldoria, but even so, he knew their pursuers wouldn't be far behind. Outside, the city was in an uproar. Citizens whispered in hushed tones, speculating about the war that seemed inevitable. Some rejoiced in the chaos, hoping for the fall of their enemies, while others wept, knowing what war would bring. Lyra pressed a hand to her abdomen, feeling an unfamiliar warmth. She paused, gasping as a sudden wave of energy pulsed through her. Ethan noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern flickering in his eyes. I don't know," she stammered. "It's the baby. I felt something." Before Ethan could respond, a distant explosion sent tremors through the ground again. A fiery glow illuminated the skyline as one of the royal towers collapsed in the distance. They didn't have time for questions. They had to escape. Through the underground tunnels, they emerged in the city outskirts. Ethan had arranged for a transport vessel, but it was several miles away, hidden in an abandoned outpost. Their path was fraught with danger, but they had no choice. As they sprinted through the deserted alleys, figures emerged from the shadows. Hooded, armed, and moving with precision. The Vezan. Ethan barely had time to react before blaster fire illuminated the night. He pushed Lyra behind him, returning fire as he moved. The air filled with a sharp hum of energy bolts ricocheting off the walls. Lyra clenched her fists, preparing to fight, but as another shot was fired directly at her, something impossible happened. A shimmering barrier of energy erupted from her body, deflecting the blast. The attackers recoiled, startled. Ethan turned, stunned. Lyra was glowing. Her body pulsed with an ethereal light, an unseen force radiating from within her. The ground beneath them trembled as if reacting to her power. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the glow faded, leaving her breathless and disoriented. The Vezan hesitated, momentarily thrown off. Ethan seized the opportunity, grabbing Lyra's hand. "Run!" They tore through the streets, adrenaline propelling them forward. The transport was still far, But they couldn't stop. They couldn't afford to be caught. As they ran, Lyra struggled to comprehend what had just happened. The energy, the shield it had come from the baby. Their child had protected her. This was no ordinary child. And now, everyone in the galaxy would know it. The final battle had begun. The skies above Eldoria blazed with streaks of energy as ships clashed in a dazzling display of destruction. The forces of the Vezan, armed with their relentless devotion to eradicating the union of two worlds, launched their assault with terrifying precision. Against them stood not just the defenders of Eldoria and Earth but also unexpected allies, rebels who had come to believe in Ethan and Lyra's cause. Ethan gripped his weapon tightly, standing at the heart of the battlefield. His breath was steady, his mind clear. He had never imagined himself as a savior, let alone as the protector of a future beyond his understanding. But here he was, fighting not just for himself or Lyra but for the child who could reshape the destiny of two civilizations. Lyra, clad in her royal armor, fought alongside him. She moved with a grace that seemed almost supernatural, her every strike precise, her presence commanding. Her people had doubted her, had even sought to control her, but now, she stood as their champion. And within her, their future thrived. Their enemies emerged from the darkness, cloaked figures weaving through the chaos, determined to reach them. Ethan fired, his shots cutting through the battlefield. But the Vezan were not so easily deterred. They had waited too long for this moment. One figure stepped forward, unlike the others. A leader among them, a force of pure conviction. He raised his hand, and the battlefield seemed to still for a brief second. "You do not understand what you are unleashing," he called, his voice carrying over the carnage. "That child is an abomination. Its existence will bring ruin upon us all." Lyra took a step forward, her eyes blazing with defiance. "You fear what you do not understand. But fear does not give you the right to decide our fate." The leader sneered. "Then you leave me no choice." With a single motion, he summoned a surge of energy, a blast of raw power aimed directly at Lyra. Ethan moved before he could think, pushing her aside. The energy struck him full force, sending him crashing to the ground. Time seemed to slow. Lyra cried out, rushing to his side. "Ethan!" His body trembled, pain racking every nerve. But he managed a weak smile. "Still here," he murmured, coughing. "Not going anywhere?" The battle raged on, but something had shifted. The ground beneath them trembled, a new force awakening. The sky darkened, a storm of energy swirling around them. And then it happened. A surge of light erupted from Lyra, enveloping Ethan, and expanding outward. The power was ancient, undeniable. It pulsed with the force of generations, of something greater than any single individual. The Vezan leader recoiled, horror flickering across his face. "Impossible," he breathed. Lyra rose to her feet, her body radiating with the energy of her ancestors. The child within her was more than just a symbol. It was a force of change, and it had chosen its parents well. Ethan felt his strength returning, the pain fading. He stood beside her, understanding in that moment that they were no longer just two people caught in a tide of war. They were something greater. And together, they would win. The final clash was swift and decisive. The Vezan, seeing the power before them, faltered. Their leader, realizing his defeat, let out a final cry of rage before vanishing into the chaos. Without their figurehead, their forces scattered. As the dust settled, silence fell over the battlefield. Eldorians and humans alike stood together, no longer enemies but survivors of a war that had nearly consumed them. The high councils of both worlds, once so divided, now saw the truth: they could not exist without one another. A new alliance was forged that day. One not born of politics or desperation, but of trust, of understanding, of a shared future. Ethan turned to Lyra, his hand finding hers. "We did it." She smiled, exhaustion and relief in her eyes. "No," she whispered. "We're just getting started." The war was over, but the echoes of its devastation lingered. The skies above Eldoria, once filled with fire and destruction, now stretched endlessly, carrying the first signs of a new dawn. The two civilizations so long at odds stood together amidst the ruins of their old hatred, watching as the world shifted toward an uncertain yet hopeful future. Ethan Carter and Lyra Vex, once pawns in a political game, had become something more. Their forced union had transformed into an unbreakable bond, one forged through shared struggle and sacrifice. Now, as they stood before the leaders of both Earth and Eldoria, they were no longer mere symbols of diplomacy. They were the embodiment of a new era. A hush fell over the gathered crowd as Lyra stepped forward. Her voice, strong yet filled with emotion, carried across the assembly. "For centuries, we have feared one another. We have allowed that fear to shape our destinies, to dictate our choices. But fear is no longer our master." She turned to Ethan, her eyes reflecting a deep understanding that had been earned through battle and loss. "Together, we have proven that unity is not only possible, it is necessary." Ethan took a breath, stepping beside her. "We have all lost too much to let history repeat itself. The war between our worlds nearly destroyed us, but it also gave us something invaluable: a reason to change. We stand here today not as conquerors, not as enemies, but as allies." The crowd stirred, murmurs of agreement rippling through them. The high councils of both civilizations exchanged glances, recognizing the undeniable truth in their words. And then, the true reason for their unity stirred within Lyra. She placed a protective hand over her abdomen, feeling the faint pulse of energy that emanated from within. The child, neither fully human nor entirely Eldorian, was living proof that their two peoples were not so different after all. He would be the bridge between their worlds, the first of his kind, and perhaps the key to a future no one had ever dared to imagine. As if sensing the weight of the moment, the wind shifted, carrying with it a hum of energy. The ancient prophecies had spoken of change, of a force that would reshape the galaxy. Whether this child was that force or merely the first step toward something greater remained unknown. But one thing was certain: his existence had already rewritten history. The leaders of both planets approached Ethan and Lyra, solemn yet resolute. One by one, they bowed their heads, a gesture of respect and acceptance. The old ways were crumbling, giving way to something new. But even in peace, shadows lurked. Beyond the reach of their gathering, in the depths of space, a figure watched. Cloaked in darkness, eyes gleaming with unreadable intent, they observed the birth of this new alliance with quiet amusement. The war had ended, but conflicts had a way of evolving. And this was only the beginning. Back on Eldoria, Ethan turned to Lyra, his fingers lacing through hers. "This isn't the end, is it?" She smiled, a knowing glint in her eyes. "No," she whispered. "It's just the beginning."